Hi everyone. You are watching the MyBrain Learning channel. The topic in today's episode is about the Wye-Delta Motor Control. It is typically used to reduce the voltage across the three sets of winding in the three-phase induction motor. An electric motor with 5 horsepower and above rating requires the use of the Wye-Delta Motor Control to reduce the torque and starting current during the start running condition. During the Y starting condition, it has current approximately 3 times the current if it is connected using only the across-the-line electric motor, also called as the direct online electric motor control. Wye-Delta Electric Motor Control is also used to avoid the persistent tripping of the overload relay, which may damage the motor winding if repeatedly started several times. After a few seconds, depending on the setting of the timer relay, the connection will be shifted to delta connection, which will then draw a lower starting current. Thus, the electric motor will then run in the normal current condition. Wye-Delta Electric Motor Control is commonly used in high-powered submersible pumps for the flood controls. It is also widely used in air handling units for centralized building air conditioning systems. Another of its common applications is the exhaust blowers used for the air out and exhaust systems. It is also used for the conventionally driven centralized chiller for building air conditioning systems. The cooling towers also use the Wye-Delta connection due to its required high-powered electric motors. A large-scale steam and hot water production by the steam boilers also uses the aforementioned electric motor control. Another common application is the use of electric fire pumps for the building fire protection system, which requires adequate pressure in case of severe fire. Let us now discuss the basic parts of the Wye-Delta Electric Motor Control. This includes the circuit breaker, which automatically or manually interrupts the flow of current in case of the fault current within the circuits. It also consists of 3 magnetic contactors. Main magnetic contactor labeled as M1, which connects to magnetic contactor M2 during delta running condition. Magnetic contactor S is connected to magnetic contactor M1 during the Y start condition. Another part is the overload relay, which protects the electric motor from the overcurrent. The timer relay transfers or shifts the Y starting connection of the electric motor to the delta running condition after a few seconds, as indicated in the time setting. It also has a buzzer which produces an audible sound that indicates the fault condition of the motor or within the circuits. Stop push button, which manually interrupts the flow of current. Start push button, which starts the running of the electric motor from Y to delta connection. And lastly, the electric motor, which will run from Y to delta connection. Let us now discuss how to connect from the power source to the control circuit, power circuit, and the electric motor. From the power source, the wires in color red, yellow, and blue will be connected to line 1 represented by L1, line 2 represented by L2, and line 3 represented by L3, respectively. The lower terminals of the circuit breaker will then be connected to the upper terminals of the M1 magnetic contactor. The lower terminals of the M1 magnetic contactor will then be connected to the upper terminals of the overload relay. From the upper terminals of the M1 magnetic contactor, this will be connected in the same order of L1, L2, and L3 represented by red, yellow, and blue to the upper terminals of the M2 magnetic contactor. On the upper terminals of the S magnetic contactor, terminals L1 and L3 will both be connected common to L2. The lower terminals of the M2 magnetic contactor will also be connected in the same order of L1, L2, and L3 represented by red, yellow, and blue to the lower terminal of S magnetic contactor. The lower terminals red, yellow, and blue of the overload relay will then be connected to terminals T1, T2, and T3 of the electric motor. The lower terminals of the S magnetic contactor common to M2 magnetic contactor will be connected in the order red, yellow, and blue to terminals T6, T4, and T5 of the electric motor, respectively. The lower terminal L1 of the circuit breaker will be connected to the overload relay terminals common to the normally open and to the normally open in series with the fault lamp terminal. The other normally open terminal of the overload relay is in series connection with the stop push button. The other terminal of the stop push button will then be connected to the start push button common to the upper terminal of the normally open auxiliary contact. The other terminal of the start push button will then be connected in the left terminal of the magnetic coil of M1 magnetic contactor. The right terminal of the magnetic coil of the M1 magnetic contactor will then be connected to the L2 of the lower terminal of the circuit breaker. The run pilot lamp is also connected in parallel with the magnetic coil of M1 magnetic contactor. The terminal of the start push button common to the magnetic coil of M1 magnetic contactor will then be connected to the timer relay in series to the lower terminal L2 of the circuit breaker. The lower terminal of the normally open auxiliary contact of the M1 magnetic contactor will be connected to the normally closed terminal of the timer relay in series with the magnetic coil of S magnetic contactor to the lower terminal L2 of the circuit breaker. The normally closed terminal of the timer relay will then be connected to the terminal of the normally open contact of the timer relay in series with normally closed auxiliary contact of the S magnetic contactor, which will be connected in series with the magnetic coil of the M2 magnetic contactor to the lower terminal L2 of the circuit breaker. The other terminal of the fault lamp will then be connected to the lower terminal L2 of the circuit breaker. And lastly, the buzzer will then be connected in parallel with the fault lamp. Let us now go to how Wye-Delta Electric Motor Control works. At switched on circuit breaker, pressing the start push button will energize the magnetic coil of the M1 magnetic contactor. This simultaneously closes the normally open auxiliary contact, then energizes the timer relay and the magnetic coil of the S magnetic contactor, which also opens its normally closed auxiliary contact. Thus, the electric motor starts in Y connection. After a few seconds, depending on the timer relay setting, the normally closed contact of the timer relay will automatically opens, which de-energizes the magnetic coil of the S magnetic contactor, then closes again its normally open auxiliary contact. This closes the normally open contact of the timer relay, then energizes the magnetic coil of M2 magnetic contactor. The electric motor is now running in delta connection. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you will like this video. Click the notification bell so that you will not miss the new videos to watch. Please like, share and subscribe to MyBrain Learning channel.